Imagine a ruler so feared, she reportedly wiped out a third of her kingdom's population. Not by war, not by famine, but by pure political terror. This isn't medieval Europe, this is Madagascar. And her name was Queen Ranavalona I. Before we dive into the madness, hit that subscribe button. Because here on UTAK Diaries, we dig up the darkest truths history tried to bury. Picture this. It's 1828. The island of Madagascar sits like a fortress in the Indian Ocean, 250 miles off the coast of East Africa. While the rest of the continent is being carved up by European powers, this island remains defiant. And at its heart rules a woman whose very name would become synonymous with terror. But Ranavalona wasn't always a queen. She wasn't even born into nobility. Her story begins in the most unlikely of places. As the daughter of a simple soldier who would change the course of history with a single act of loyalty, Ranavalona wasn't born into royalty. She was the daughter of a commoner named Andrian Sulamanguk, a soldier who once saved the life of King Andrian Poinarin, the man who unified the central highlands of Madagascar in the late 1700s. The king's life had hung by a thread during a palace conspiracy. Assassins had infiltrated the royal quarters, and it was Ranavalona's father who stepped between the blade and his sovereign. As a reward for this ultimate act of loyalty, the king took Ranavalona's family into the royal court. She was just 12 years old, but King Andrian Poinarin was more than grateful. He was strategic. In a calculated political move, he arranged for young Ranavalona to marry his son, Prince Radama. This wasn't love. This was the king was binding the loyalty of a hero's family to the crown forever. Ranavalona grew up in the royal court, watching, learning, and understanding the delicate balance of power that held the Marina kingdom together. She witnessed the politics, the betrayals, and the constant threat of European encroachment. By the time she married Prince Radama in 1810, she had already learned that survival meant being more ruthless than your enemies. King Radama I, as he became known, was a modernizer. He welcomed European missionaries, allowed the introduction of writing to Madagascar, and even formed alliances with the British. For nearly 2 decades, he transformed Madagascar into a regional power. But in 1828, at just 36 years old, King Radama died suddenly, and with no direct heir, a deadly power vacuum opened up. The succession should have been clear-cut, but it wasn't. Several princes had legitimate claims to the throne. The royal council was divided. The military was uncertain. In this chaos, Ranavalona, now a 46-year-old widow, made her move. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't negotiate. She struck with the backing of military leaders and palace insiders, who feared that a weak succession would invite European intervention. But this wasn't just a peaceful succession. The other claimants, silenced. Opposition, eliminated. Within weeks, potential rivals had simply disappeared. By the time her reign officially began, Queen Ranavalona I had already made it clear, this wasn't going to be business as usual. Queen Ranavalona ruled Madagascar from 1828 to 1861, over 3 decades of total, often brutal control. Her reign would become one of the most controversial in African history, marked by extreme isolationism, xenophobia, and internal purges that would make Stalin envious. To maintain her power, she implemented a system of terror that reached into every corner of Malagasy society. She wanted Madagascar to remain free from European influence, especially Christianity and foreign trade. While some might view this as patriotic or nationalistic, her methods were anything but noble. Her first target was the growing Christian population. King Radama had welcomed missionaries, and by 1828 there were an estimated 200,000 Christian converts in Madagascar. To Ranavalona, these converts represented a fifth column. people whose loyalty was divided between Madagascar and foreign powers. The persecution began systematically. Christians were publicly speared, crucified, or thrown off cliffs. Some were wrapped in silk mats and hurled from precipices. Others were burned alive. The Queen's soldiers would drag entire Christian families from their homes, forcing them to watch as their loved ones were tortured. But Ranavalona's favorite tool of terror was the Tangina ordeal, a trial by poison ritual that became the cornerstone of her judicial system. This wasn't just execution, it was psychological warfare designed to keep the entire population in constant fear. Here's how it worked. A suspect would be forced to swallow a poisonous nut from the Tangina tree, mixed with 3 pieces of chicken skin. If they vomited up all 3 pieces, innocent, if not, guilty, and likely dead either way, since the poison was often fatal regardless of the outcome. The ritual was conducted with religious ceremony. Priests would chant, drums would beat, the entire community would be forced to watch as neighbors, friends, and family members were subjected to this ordeal. Historical estimates say up to 3,000 people per year were subjected to Tangina trials under her rule. Let that sink in. People were dying by state-sponsored poison ceremonies, for being suspected of disloyalty, for practicing Christianity, or sometimes for simply being denounced by an enemy. The paranoia was infectious. People stopped trusting their neighbors. Families turned against each other. The mere accusation of disloyalty could mean death. So everyone became an informant, everyone became a potential victim. To some modern historians, Queen Ranavalona is a complex figure. She fiercely resisted European colonization, especially from the French and British. While neighboring African kingdoms were falling under colonial control, Ranavalona kept Madagascar independent. She reduced foreign presence by expelling most Europeans from the island. She banned missionary schools and replaced European education with traditional Malagasy learning. She cut trade ties with Europe and even executed converts to Christianity. Her message was clear. Madagascar would remain but was this anti-imperialism or xenophobia? The line gets blurry when you examine her methods. She sent ambassadors abroad, but had them followed by spies. She modernized the army with European weapons, while simultaneously executing anyone suspected of European sympathies. She built an extensive network of roads and palaces, using brutal forced labor, with thousands dying from exhaustion or exposure. The Queen's isolationist policies had devastating economic consequences. Trade with Europe had brought wealth and technology to Madagascar. When that trade stopped, the economy collapsed. Famine became common. The population began to decline not just from executions, but from starvation and disease. Yet Ranavalona remained defiant. When European powers sent diplomatic missions demanding she reverse her policies, she would have their gifts thrown into the sea and their ambassadors threatened with death. She turned Madagascar into a fortress. But it was a fortress that was slowly starving its own people. Her paranoia extended to her own family. She had her nephew executed for suspected treason. She placed her son under house arrest for years, fearing he might be influenced by European ideas. Even her closest advisers lived in constant fear of sudden execution. Madagascar stayed free, but at an unspeakable cost. Let's talk numbers. And prepare yourself, because they're staggering. Historical estimates claim that under Ranavalona's 33-year reign, as much as 1/3 of Madagascar's population died. That's hundreds of thousands of people wiped out by forced labor, public executions, starvation, and political paranoia. The population of Madagascar in 1828 was estimated at around 5 million people. By 1861, it had dropped to approximately 2.5 million. That's not just a decline. That's a demographic catastrophe. She turned the Marina Kingdom, once a growing regional power, into an isolated fortress of fear. Villagers were abandoned. Families were scattered. Entire communities simply vanished. European visitors who managed to enter Madagascar during her reign described scenes of devastation. Roads lined with skeletons. Empty villages. Survivors who were too terrified to speak above whispers. Outsiders called her the Mad Queen of Madagascar. Some missionaries called her reign a horror unmatched outside of hell. French colonial administrators later described her kingdom as a land of the dead. But here's the twist. She wasn't completely insane. Ranavalona knew exactly what she was doing. Keeping power through terror, tradition, and strategic brutality. Every execution, every Tangina trial, every act of cruelty was calculated to maintain absolute control. She understood that fear was more powerful than love, that terror was more effective than loyalty. She created a system where questioning her authority meant death, where even thinking disloyal thoughts could be fatal. Queen Ranavalona I died peacefully in 1861 at the age of 83. No rebellion took her down, no foreign army, no coup. She died in her palace, surrounded by loyalists who had survived 3 decades of terror by never questioning her authority. But the world she left behind, it was scarred beyond recognition. Her son, Ranavalona II, immediately tried to reverse her policies, opening up to Christianity and foreign trade, releasing political prisoners, and welcoming back European missionaries. But the damage had been done. The population was reduced, the kingdom was divided, the economy was in ruins, and the seeds of colonial takeover had been planted. The tragic irony is that Ranavalona's brutal isolationism, designed to keep Madagascar free, actually made it more vulnerable to colonization. Her policies had weakened the kingdom so severely that it couldn't resist European encroachment once she was gone. Less than 40 years after her death, Madagascar fell under French control in 1895. The independence she had fought so savagely to preserve was lost within a generation. Today, she's remembered in 2 very different ways. To some Malagasy nationalists, she's a symbol of resistance, a ruler who stood up to imperialism when the rest of Africa was falling to European powers. To others, she's a tyrant who ruled with cruelty, paranoia, and bloodshed, destroying her own kingdom in the name of protecting it. The truth, as always, is more complex. Ranavalona was both a patriot and a monster, a defender of tradition and a destroyer of her own people. She saved Madagascar from European colonization for 33 years, but at a cost that may have been greater than colonization itself. Was Queen Ranavalona I a hero who protected her kingdom, or a dictator who destroyed it from within? That's for history to decide. But here's the truth. You don't need a crown to leave a legacy. You just need enough fear to make people remember your name. And Madagascar still remembers. In the highlands where she once ruled, her name is still spoken in whispers. Some curse her memory, others honor it, but no one forgets it. Hit like, share, and subscribe to UTAK Diaries, where real history, crazy facts, and brain-bending stories come to life. Don't just scroll, stay curious.